The rope corral in the center of Thornwell Crossing had never held so many frightened men. Sheriff Grimtusk stood in the dust of the market square with her arms crossed over a fitted leather cuirass, the laces at her ribs pulled tight enough to show the powerful lines beneath, and watched the fourth suitor of the day stumble backward over his own boots. He was a merchant's son, plump and pale, who had spent the morning boasting to anyone who would listen that he would win the Orc chief's daughter with charm alone. Charm had lasted exactly as long as it took her to step close enough that he had to tilt his head back to find her eyes. "You are shaking," she said, not unkindly, though the words cracked like a whip across the square. "I have not even spoken yet." "I forgive me, I only," the young man stammered, and then he was gone, shoving through the crowd of onlookers with his fine coat flapping, leaving behind the echo of laughter from the gathered townsfolk and the low, unimpressed grunt of the Orc warriors standing at the corral's edge. She was close to 7 feet in her boots, and standing on the raised platform of packed earth that the town elders had built for this humiliating parade of hopeful bridegrooms. She looked less like a woman being courted and more like a mountain, deciding whether the valley below deserved to exist. Green-gray skin caught the midday sun, marked along both forearms with the twisting clan tattoos of the Grimtusk line. Her black hair was drawn back in thick war braids threaded with iron beads that clicked softly when she moved her head, and her tusks, small and pale, showed faintly when her lip curled in scorn, which it did often. She wore no armor plate today, only supple leathers, a lace bodice that clung to her figure and a split leather skirt over close-fitting leggings, practical and unornamented except for the wolf-tooth pendant of her clan at her throat. She had not dressed for suitors. She had dressed for war because to her this felt like war. "Next," called Magistrate Aldrich Hale from beneath the shade of a canvas awning, consulting a scroll with a weary sigh. "Captain Ashby, if you would." A broad-shouldered man in the deep blue coat of the garrison strode forward with far more confidence than the merchant's son had managed. Captain Dermot Ashby had killed orcs in the Border War, and he did not let anyone forget it. He stopped a full pace closer than any of the others had dared, chin lifted, hand resting with practiced ease on the pommel of his sheathed sword. "I do not run from anything, Lady Grimtusk," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. Sheriff's amber eyes studied him the way a butcher studies a carcass, deciding where the knife should go first. "You wear that sword like it means something," she said. "It killed my cousin at Ashfield Ford. I remember the crest on the hilt." The color drained from Ashby's face, though he held his ground admirably for 3 more heartbeats before his hand drifted, unbidden, toward the sword as if to hide it, and Sheriff moved. She did not draw a weapon. She simply reached out with one broad hand, closed it around the sword's crossguard, and with a single contemptuous wrench tore the blade from its scabbard and flung it end over end into the horse trough at the edge of the square. Water sheeted up in a silver curtain. The crowd gasped as one. "Come back when you remember whose blood is on it," she said, and Ashby, red-faced with fury and humiliation, retreated with as much dignity as a man could manage while dripping horse-trough water from his boots. 4 suitors. 4 failures. The line of hopeful men still waiting along the fence rail had thinned considerably in the last hour, several having quietly slipped away rather than face her. Sheriff turned from the platform, disgust plain on her handsome, scarred features, and it was in that turning that her gaze snagged unexpectedly, uselessly. She told herself on a man at the very back of the crowd who was not in line at all. He was small. That was the first thing anyone would have said of Nathan Winslow, standing there with a newly turned cartwheel balanced against his hip and sawdust still clinging to the leather apron tied around his waist. Small next to the garrison captain, small next to the merchant's son, smaller still against the towering shape of the woman on the platform. He had sandy hair going a little gray at the temples, though he could not have been much past 30, a lean, wiry frame built more for patient work than for show, and calloused hands that had clearly done harder things than shape wagon wheels, though nothing in his quiet, weathered face announced that history. He was not looking away. Sharamph felt the absence of fear in that gaze like a splinter under a fingernail, small, sharp, impossible to ignore. Every other man in Thornwell Crossing had spent the morning flinching, stammering, retreating. This one simply stood with his cartwheel and looked at her the way a man might look at a mountain he intended to climb rather than one he intended to flee. "You," she said, and her voice carried across the square, silencing the murmur of the crowd. "Cartwright, why are you not shaking?" Every head turned. Nathan set the wheel down carefully against a fence post, as if this were the most natural interruption in the world, and wiped his hands on his apron before answering. "Because you have not given me a reason to yet, my lady," he said. The magistrate on the platform coughed in surprise. Somewhere in the crowd, someone laughed nervously and was quickly shushed. Sharamph descended from the platform in 3 long strides, and the crowd parted before her the way water parts before a ship's prow, until she stood over Nathan Winslow with barely 3 feet between them, close enough that he had to tip his chin back to hold her eyes, and still he did not look away. "Everyone runs," she said, quieter now, though the words still carried an edge sharpened by a long morning of disappointment. "Even the brave ones run, eventually. It is only a matter of how long it takes. I have run from things before," Nathan admitted. "I am not too proud to say it, but I have learned there is a difference between fear that keeps you alive and fear that just makes you small. You have not given me the first kind, only the second, and I have never much cared for being made to feel small by anything I did not choose to fear." For a long moment Sharamph said nothing at all. The market square, usually a clatter of cartwheels and haggling voices, had gone utterly still, every eye fixed on the strange tableau of the towering orc warrior and the slight, sawdust-dusted Cartwright who would not look away from her. Then for the first time all day Sharamph Grimtusk laughed, a short, surprised bark of sound that seemed to startle even her. "What is your name, small man?" "Nathan Winslow. Nathan Winslow," she repeated, as if testing the shape of it in her mouth. "You did not come here to court me." "No," he agreed. "I came to deliver a wheel to the smithy. I did not know today was the day they were parading husbands past you like prize bulls at a market fair." A ripple of scandalized laughter went through the crowd at that, and Magistrate Hale cleared his throat loudly from the platform, clearly torn between outrage and the sudden, undeniable fact that the Orc Chief's daughter had not looked this entertained in the 3 months since the Suitor gauntlet had begun. "Perhaps you should have," Sharamph said, and there was something new in her voice now, something considering, something that had not been there for any of the other men who had stood in that dust before her. "Perhaps, Nathan Winslow, you should stay and find out what the prize bulls were competing for." The bargain that had brought Sharamph Grimtusk to Thornwell Crossing had been struck 3 years after the last true battle of the Border War, in a tent pitched on neutral ground between the Grimtusk war camp and the town's outer palisade, where her father, Chief Korgeth Grimtusk, and a delegation of frightened, grim-faced human elders had hammered out the terms of what came to be called the Ashfield Accord. The war had cost both sides more than either wished to count: burned homesteads on the human side, burned burial grounds on the orc side, a decade of raids and reprisals that had left neither victorious and both exhausted. Peace, when it finally came, had come not from mercy but from mutual ruin, and peace born of exhaustion is a fragile thing that needs constant tending. Chief Korgeth, canny as any general, had proposed the marriage alliance himself. His daughter was unwed, formidable, respected by every warrior in the clan, and utterly unmatched in the eyes of any orc suitor foolish enough to imagine he could rule beside her rather than stand in her shadow. If she married a human of standing, he reasoned, both peoples would have a stake in each other's survival that no treaty of parchment could match. The town council, hungry for the trade routes that peace would open through Grimtusk territory to the mountain passes beyond, agreed with an eagerness that made Sharamph's stomach turn even now, months later. She had not been asked whether she wished to be a bridge built of her own body. She had simply been told that she was one, and left to stand upon a platform while a parade of men who wanted land grants and trading rights more than they wanted her looked upon her like a prize to be won or a monster to be endured. Nathan Winslow had fought in that war too, though few in Thornwell Crossing knew the particulars, and he preferred it that way. He had taken up the sellsword's blade at 17 out of hunger more than ambition, and he had put it down at 26 after a skirmish in the Ashfield foothills that he did not speak of to anyone, not even to Tomas Farrow, the old blacksmith who had become the closest thing to a friend he had in town. He had seen orc warriors die badly and human soldiers die worse, had watched men he called brothers do things in the name of victory that no cause was worth, and when the peace finally came, he had walked away from the company that employed him, sold his sword for the price of a small plot of land at the edge of town, and planted an orchard. It was slow work, orchards. Apple trees did not care about wars or treaties or the ambitions of chiefs and magistrates. They cared about water and pruning and patience was the one thing Nathan Winslow had in abundance. He had built himself a modest homestead on that plot, a low cottage of timber and fieldstone, a workshop beside it where he plied his second trade as Cartwright, and rows of young trees that had only just begun, in the last 2 seasons, to bear real fruit. He was, by his own reckoning, a man who had traded a blade for a wheel and a battlefield for an orchard, and if he was lonely out there at the edge of town with only the creak of his own cartwheels and the whisper of leaves for company, he had told himself for a long time that loneliness was a fair price for peace. He had not expected, on an ordinary morning meant only for delivering a repaired wheel to the smithy, to have that peace upended by a pair of amber eyes that refused to let him go. She came to his homestead 3 nights after the gauntlet, when the moon was thin and the orchard was full of the soft, secretive sounds of a summer night settling in. Nathan heard the fence gate creak and came out onto the porch of his cottage with a lantern already in hand, half expecting deer at his young trees, and found instead Sheriff Grimtusk standing in his yard like something conjured out of the dark itself, tall enough that her head nearly brushed the low branch of his oldest apple tree. "You should not be here alone," he said, though he made no move to raise any alarm. "If the magistrate learns the chief's daughter is wandering the edge of town after dark—" "The magistrate does not own the dark," Sheriff said, "and I am not accustomed to asking permission for where I walk." She looked in the lantern light, both more and less fearsome than she had on the platform in the square. The war braids were the same, the tattoos the same, the leathers the same fitted lines that made her look built for battle even at rest. But there was something in the set of her shoulders that spoke less of a warrior on display and more of a woman who had walked a long way to ask a question she was afraid to ask. "Why did you come, then?" Nathan asked, setting the lantern on the porch rail so its light would not blind her. "It is not a short walk from the war camp. I wanted to see if you were as strange in the dark as you were in the daylight," she said. "Every man who fled from me in that square had a reason. Land, or gold, or the honor of saying he had courted an orc chief's daughter and lived to boast of it. You wanted none of those things. You did not even want to be there at all. I find that I do not know what to do with a man who wants nothing from me." Nathan considered this for a long moment, leaning against the porch post with his arms crossed, studying her the way he might study a length of good oak before deciding how best to shape it. "Maybe I want something," he said finally. "I just have not decided yet whether it is foolish to say it. Say it anyway. I have grown tired of men who measure their words around me as if I were a snake they were trying not to startle." "All right, then." He straightened, meeting her eyes across the small distance of his yard, unflinching now as he had been in the square. "I want to know what you sound like when you are not performing for a crowd. In the square you were magnificent, and I mean that plainly, not as flattery. But you were also acting the part they wanted you to play, the terrible orc bride nobody dares approach. I do not think that is the whole of you. I would like to meet the rest if you would let me." Something in Sheriff's face shifted, some old and guarded thing loosening by a fraction, though she covered it quickly with a low, amused sound. "That is either the bravest thing a man has said to me, or the stupidest." "Perhaps both," Nathan allowed. "I have been called worse for less." She laughed again, that same startled bark from the square, and this time it did not seem to surprise her as much. She crossed the yard to stand at the base of his porch steps, and even there, with 3 wooden steps between them, she still had to look down to meet his eyes, though the distance between their faces had shrunk enough that Nathan could see the faint scar that ran along her jaw, could smell wood smoke and leather, and something underneath that was only her. "Show me your orchard, small Cartwright," she said. "Since I have already ruined my night's sleep coming here, I may as well see what a man who quit a war to grow apples has made of himself." He showed her. They walked between the young rows in the thin moonlight, Nathan naming each variety like old friends. The Ashfield reds that had come from a cutting his grandmother once kept, the pale gold ones he was still coaxing into good fruit, the stubborn old tree at the corner of the plot that had survived a lightning strike the year before he bought the land and still, against all reasonable expectation, bore the sweetest apples of the lot. Sharamph listened with a closeness that unsettled her a little, the way she had not truly listened to anyone in a long time, and found herself, without quite meaning to, telling him things in return about her mother, dead in a raid before the Accord, about the weight of being a chief's only daughter and the only warrior in 3 generations of Grimtusk women, expected to be strong enough for a war camp and biddable enough for a marriage bed, as if those 2 things could occupy the same body without tearing it in half. "They do not want me," she said quietly, standing beneath the lightning-struck apple tree with her fingers absently tracing the old scar in its bark. "Not the Suitors, not even my father, not truly. They want what marrying me will buy them, a road through Grimtusk land, a treaty that will hold another decade. I have begun to wonder if there is a single soul on either side of this accursed border who wants Sharamph Grimtusk, and not merely the alliance she carries on her back like a yoke." "I want you," Nathan said, before he had fully decided to say it, and then, because it was out in the air between them now and there was no taking it back, he did not try to soften it. "Not the alliance, not the treaty. I do not care what road it opens or what land it settles. I want to know what you sound like laughing at something that is not bitter. I want to know if you like the taste of a good apple in autumn, or if war camp fare has ruined you for anything sweet. I want, very badly, to keep standing in orchards with you at midnight, which is a foolish and dangerous thing for a small Cartwright to want from a chief's daughter, and I want it anyway." For a long moment Sharamph said nothing, and Nathan wondered if he had finally, at last, said the thing that would send even this fearless woman running from him. Then she reached out, slow and deliberate, and rested one broad, calloused hand against the side of his face, her palm warm and startlingly gentle against his jaw, and he understood that she was not running at all. "No one has ever said such a thing to me," she said, low, almost wondering. "I do not know what to do with it." "You do not have to do anything with it tonight," Nathan said, though his heart was hammering hard enough that he was certain she could feel it through the air between them. "Just come back tomorrow night if you want to. That is all I am asking." She came back the next night, and the night after that. Their meetings settled into a rhythm that felt, to both of them, less like courtship, and more like the slow, careful grafting of one tree onto another, 2 different growths learning to share a single root. Sharamph would slip away from the war camp after the evening fires burned low, and Nathan would leave the lantern lit on the porch rail as a quiet signal that he was awake and waiting, and they would walk the orchard rows or sit together on the porch steps while she taught him words of the old Grimtusk tongue, and he taught her, in turn, the patient work of grafting a new branch onto old rootstock, guiding her large, strong hands with his smaller ones as she learned to make the careful cut without tearing the bark. It was in the closeness of that work that the charge between them first became impossible to ignore, her hand brushing his as she reached for the grafting knife, the accidental press of her shoulder against his when they crouched together over a young sapling. Moments that should have meant nothing, and instead meant everything, each one lingering a beat too long to be truly accidental. Nathan found himself inventing reasons to guide her hands more than the graft strictly required. Sharamph found herself standing closer than the work demanded, watching the careful concentration on his face rather than the tree in front of them. "You are not paying attention to the graft," she told him one night, amusement warm in her voice, though she had not moved her hand from beneath his. "I am paying very close attention," Nathan said, "just not to the tree." She turned her head and their faces were suddenly very near, her amber eyes searching his in the lantern light, and for a moment neither of them breathed. It was Sharamph who closed the last of the distance, bending down with a warrior's decisiveness even in this, and kissed him not tentative, not careful, but the sure and hungry kiss of a woman who had spent months being feared, and had finally found someone unafraid to be close to her. Nathan's hands came up to her face, and he kissed her back with everything the loneliness of his quiet orchard life had been storing up without his knowing it, until they broke apart breathless and half-laughing at their own foolishness, foreheads pressed together beneath the old lightning-struck tree. "This is a very bad idea," Sharamph murmured against his mouth. "Almost certainly," Nathan agreed, and kissed her again anyway. It could not stay secret forever, not in a town as small and watchful as Thornwell Crossing, and the man who found the crack in their careful silence was Captain Dermot Ashby, still nursing the humiliation of his ruined sword and his ruined pride, and hungry for a way to reclaim both. He had set his sights on the marriage alliance as a path to a garrison command and a seat on the town council, and he did not intend to let a sawdust-covered Cartwright steal that future out from under him. It was Ashby's man, a garrison scout skilled at moving quiet through brush, who spotted the Orc chief's daughter slipping away from the war camp 3 nights running, and followed her at a careful distance to the edge of Nathan Winslow's orchard. What he reported back to his captain was enough to set Ashby's plans into vicious motion. The attack came on a night when Sharamph had lingered later than usual, sitting with Nathan on the porch steps with her head resting against his shoulder in a rare, unguarded moment. The war braids come half loose, her guard, for once, entirely down. It was the crackle of torches at the tree line that warned them first, 3 shapes moving fast through the orchard rows with fire in their hands and cruelty in their strides. Ashby's men come to burn the young trees and send a message no council would need to speak aloud. Nathan was on his feet in an instant, some old, buried instinct from his sellsword years surfacing hard and fast, and he grabbed the axe leaning by the porch door without thinking, but Sharamph was faster. She rose to her full height with a roar that shook the leaves from the nearest branches, and she did not run toward the fire, she ran toward the men, closing the distance before the first torch could reach the trunk of the lightning-struck apple tree, and drove her shoulder into the lead man with the force of a charging bull, sending him sprawling into the dirt with his torch guttering out beneath him. The second man swung a cudgel at her head. She caught his wrist mid-strike and twisted until he cried out and dropped the weapon, and the third, seeing his companions down, turned to flee only to find Nathan blocking the row with the axe held steady in both hands, his stance wide and sure in a way that spoke, suddenly and unmistakably, of a man who had once known how to fight and had simply chosen, for years, not to. "Go back to your captain," Nathan said, low and hard, and something in his voice made the man believe him utterly. "Tell him the next torch that comes near these trees, I will not be so patient." The men fled into the dark, dragging their groaning fellow with them, and Sharamph turned to find Nathan already lowering the axe, hands trembling slightly now that the danger had passed, the old instinct receding as quickly as it had risen. "You should not have stood in front of him," she said, gripping his shoulders, checking him for injury with a roughness that betrayed how frightened she had actually been. He could have, Nathan agreed. "But you had already put 2 of them in the dirt before I even lifted the axe. I think it is you who did the standing between, not me." Sharamph looked at him for a long moment, something fierce and unguarded moving behind her eyes, and then she kissed him again, harder this time, one hand fisted in the front of his shirt as if she meant to make certain he could not be taken from her by fire or by anything else. And Nathan understood in that moment, with the smell of smoke and crushed grass still hanging in the night air, that whatever they had begun in secret had become something neither of them could easily walk away from now. The scout's report reached Ashby before dawn, and by midday the story had run through Thornwell Crossing like fire through dry grass. The chief's daughter, meant for a husband chosen by treaty, had been seen night after night at the homestead of a common Cartwright, and now 3 of the captain's own men bore bruises to prove she had defended him with orc strength against a lawful patrol. Ashby's version of events, of course, made no mention of torches. By the time Magistrate Hale summoned both parties to the council hall, the whole town had already decided, in low and scandalized voices over market stalls and tavern tables, that Nathan Winslow had somehow bewitched, seduced, or manipulated the orc chief's daughter into abandoning the alliance that was meant to keep them all safe. Chief Corgeth Grimtusk arrived at the council hall himself, a mountain of scarred muscle and cold fury, flanked by 2 clan elders and the aged orc priestess Vashka, whose milky eyes had seen more winters than anyone else in either camp. He did not look at his daughter as he entered. He looked at Nathan, standing small and steady between 2 garrison guards at the front of the hall, and the look he gave him could have curdled milk. "You will explain," Corgeth said to the room at large, though his eyes never left Nathan, "why my daughter promised to bring peace between our peoples, has been sneaking about at night with a man of no rank, no land worth speaking of, and no claim to her whatsoever." The council hall was packed to its rafters, every bench full. Townsfolk crowded 3 deep along the back wall, for word of the scandal had traveled fast, and everyone in Thornwell Crossing wanted to see how it would end. Sharamph stood near the front, her jaw set, her hands clenched at her sides, and Nathan could see the effort it cost her not to simply place herself bodily between him and the room's judgment. "I stand accused, then," Nathan said, before Magistrate Hale could even begin the formal charges, "of loving a woman no one else in this town was brave enough to truly see." A murmur ran through the crowd. Ashby, seated near the front with a smug set to his mouth, rose to press his advantage. "He stands accused of endangering the Ashfield Accord," Ashby said, "by luring the chief's daughter away from her sworn purpose with tricks and flattery, jeopardizing 3 years of hard-won peace for his own gain. I ask the council to see this Cartwright removed from Thornwell Crossing entirely, and the chief's daughter returned to her proper duty." "Proper duty," Sharamph repeated, and her voice, when it came, was low and dangerous enough that even Ashby took an involuntary step back. "You speak of my proper duty as though I were a plow horse to be led back to its harness, Captain. I have stood on that platform in the square and watched a parade of men flee from me like frightened children, every one of them wanting the land and the treaty and none of them wanting me. This man did not flee." "That does not make him worthy of you," Ashby snapped. "It makes him either foolish or cunning enough to see an advantage others could not." "There is a law," Vashka said then, and her cracked, ancient voice cut through the chamber like a knife through cloth, silencing even Ashby mid-breath. Every head turned toward the old priestess, who had not spoken a single word since entering the hall. "A law older than the Ashfield Accord, older than this town. Older, perhaps, than either of our peoples remembers clearly, save in the oldest songs." "Speak it, then, elder," Chief Corgeth said, though there was a wariness in his voice now, as if he already suspected he would not like what he heard. Vashka turned her milky eyes toward Sharamph, and though she could not truly see, it seemed to everyone in that hall that she looked directly at the chief's daughter with perfect clarity. "Among the Grimtusk clan and the clans before them, there was once a rite called the Unblinking Vow," Vashka said. "The old days, before marriages were arranged for treaties and land. A woman of the clan who could not be cowed by any suitor, who towered over her people in strength and spirit, both was permitted to test her suitors not with gold or rank, but with her gaze alone. Any man who could hold that gaze freely, without fear forced upon him, and without artifice used to steady his nerve, before witnesses of both blood and clan, was declared bound to her by the old law, whether either family wished it or not. It was considered the highest sign the ancestors could give, that two souls were matched not by cunning or by treaty, but by true courage meeting true courage. The hall had gone utterly silent. Ashby's face had drained of its smugness entirely. "That right has not been invoked in 100 years, Chief Korgeth said slowly, though he did not deny its truth. "You cannot mean," "I mean," Vashka said, "that half this town stood witness in the market square 3 months past, when my chief's daughter looked upon this small Cartwright, and he did not flinch, did not look away, did not run as every other man before him had run. I have asked among the elders who were present that day, and among the clan warriors who watched from the corral fence. They confirm it. It was the unblinking vow, whether any of you knew its name or not. By the old law of the Grimtusk clan, older than any treaty this council has signed, Sheriff Grimtusk was bound to Nathan Winslow the moment he held her gaze and did not run. The council hall erupted. Townsfolk shouted over one another, some outraged, some delighted. The scandal of the secret courtship suddenly transformed into something far stranger and far more binding than anyone had imagined. Magistrate Hale banged his gavel uselessly against the roar. Ashby was on his feet, red-faced, shouting that this was clan superstition with no bearing on a human council's treaty, that the alliance had been promised to serve the town's interests and could not simply be overridden by an old wives' tale from the war camp. "It is not superstition," Chief Korgeth said, and his voice, though quiet, somehow cut through the entire clamor of the hall. He was staring at his daughter now, truly looking at her for what seemed the first time in months, and something in his broad, scarred face had shifted, not softened, exactly, but opened, like a door long jammed shut finally giving way. "I invoked no such right when I promised her hand for the accord. I did not think to. I was thinking only of roads and treaties, as you accuse this Cartwright of doing, Captain, though it seems I am the guiltier man in that regard." He turned to Vashka. "You are certain of this law's standing, elder. You would swear it before the clan and before the ancestors." "I would swear it on my own bones," Vashka said, "which are old enough that the swearing costs me little." A ripple of nervous laughter broke the tension, and Sheriff, who had stood rigid and silent through the entire exchange, finally stepped forward, past Ashby, past the magistrate's bench, until she stood directly before her father in the center of the packed hall. "You asked me to be a bridge, father," she said, and her voice, though steady, carried a rawness that silenced the last of the murmuring crowd. "I stood on that platform and let strangers measure me like livestock because you told me it would keep our people safe. I did that. I did not complain, though it cost me more than any of you understood. But I will not now be told that the one true thing to come out of that humiliation, the one man in 3 months who looked at me and saw a woman rather than a war prize, is somehow a violation of the very peace I was asked to buy with my own dignity. If the old law says we are bound, then the old law is kinder to me than this council ever was." Chief Korgeth was silent for a long moment, his jaw working, some old orc pride warring visibly with something that looked, to Nathan's surprise, very much like shame. "Bring him forward," Korgeth said finally, and the guards released Nathan's arms, allowing him to step up beside Sheriff, small against her towering height but standing straight nonetheless. Korgeth studied him with the same weighing, measuring look he might have given a blade before a battle. "You fought in the border war," Korgeth said. It was not a question. "I did," Nathan said. "I have not spoken of it much. I am not proud of the things that war made me capable of. I put down my sword when it ended because I did not want to be that man any longer. I wanted instead to grow something, to build something with my hands that did not end in someone's death. And yet 3 nights ago you stood in your orchard with an axe raised against armed men to protect my daughter." "I would raise it again," Nathan said, without hesitation, "for her and only for her. I have no wish to be a soldier again, Chief Korgath. But I will not stand aside while anyone tries to burn what I love." Something in Korgath's expression eased further at that, a grudging respect creeping into the hard lines of his face. "The old law may bind you," he said slowly, "but law alone does not make a match worthy in a father's eyes, small Cartwright. Nor does it settle the matter that brought us to this council in the first place. The Accord still needs its road through Grimtusk land. The town council still needs its trade route to the mountain passes. If my daughter is not to seal that bargain with a marriage of pure alliance, then something else must be offered in its place, or Captain Ashby here will find no shortage of council members eager to say the old law is worthless superstition after all." The hall quieted again, every eye turning now toward Nathan, waiting to see what a Cartwright with no land and no rank could possibly offer to satisfy a treaty that had been meant to move armies and open kingdoms. Nathan looked at Sharamph for a long moment, and something passed between them. Not fear, but a kind of fierce and quiet resolve, the same steadiness that had first caught her eye across a crowded square. "I have no gold to offer and no army," Nathan said, turning back to face Chief Korgath and the assembled council both. "But I have a trade, and I have hands that know how to build. The mountain passes your people, and this town both want opened have never had proper roads, because no cart built by human hands has ever survived the Grimtusk switchbacks, and no sled built by clan hands has ever been trusted past the border markers by frightened town merchants. I propose to build the road myself, not with soldiers but with wagons. I will design and build a fleet of trade carts suited to that mountain passage, working alongside Grimtusk craftsmen, so the design belongs to both our peoples equally, and I will oversee the first 3 seasons of trade caravans myself, so that human merchants and orc traders learn to trust the same wheels rolling beneath them. That is not a treaty sealed with one woman's suffering. That is a peace built with both our hands together that will outlast any single marriage." Silence held the hall for a long moment. Then Tomas Pharaoh, the old blacksmith, rose from his bench near the back with a grin splitting his weathered face. "I will forge the axles myself, and gladly," he called out. "Better a road built by a man I trust than another decade of us all flinching at shadows across that border." Others began to murmur agreement. Merchants who had long dreamed of the mountain trade route, townsfolk weary of a peace that felt more like held breath than true safety, and even a few of the orc warriors near the back of the hall, drawn by curiosity to witness the council's judgment, nodded slowly at the notion of a road built by shared craft rather than shared fear. Magistrate Hale, sensing the tide of the room, banged his gavel with considerably more confidence than before. "The council will accept the terms," he said, "provided the road is completed within 3 seasons as promised, and provided Captain Ashby withdraws his charges against Master Winslow entirely." Ashby, seeing the hall firmly turned against him, had little choice but to grind out his agreement through clenched teeth, and Chief Korgath, watching his daughter's face watching the fierce, open hope there that he had not seen in her since before her mother died finally allowed the ghost of a smile to cross his scarred features. "Then it seems," Korgath said, "that my daughter has found herself a husband after all, and a road besides. The ancestors have strange senses of humor." He looked at Nathan directly. "You will call me by my name, small Cartwright, and not by my title, once the road is built and my daughter wears your mark. Bring my grandchildren nothing but stubbornness, and we will get along fine." The hall broke into noise again, this time laughter and cheering mixed with the outraged sputtering of Captain Ashby, and Sharamph, heedless of the hundreds of watching eyes, bent down and kissed Nathan Winslow full on the mouth in the middle of the crowded council hall, to the enormous delight of everyone present save one furious garrison captain who slipped out the back door before the vows could even be spoken. The marking took place 3 weeks later, at the edge of Nathan's orchard beneath the old lightning-struck apple tree, in a ceremony that blended customs from both their worlds in a way that felt, to everyone gathered, entirely new and entirely right. Townsfolk from Thornwell Crossing stood shoulder to shoulder with warriors from the Grimtusk war camp, an arrangement that would have been unthinkable a season before and now seemed, in the golden autumn light, almost inevitable. Sharamph wore her same fitted leathers for the ceremony, though Vashka had added a woven sash of deep red and green across her shoulder, the colors of both clan and town twisted together in a single braid of cloth. Nathan wore his good coat, the one he had not worn since before the war, with a similar sash tied at his waist, and when Vashka called them forward beneath the old tree's branches, it was Sharamph who took the ceremonial blade first, drawing it not across Nathan's skin but across her own palm, letting a single drop of her blood fall onto the bark of the tree that had somehow survived being struck by lightning and gone on bearing sweet fruit anyway. "An old tree that should have died and did not," she said, looking at Nathan rather than at the priestess or the gathered crowd, "seems a fitting witness for us." Nathan took the blade next, and though his hand was steadier than most would have guessed for a man who had sworn off such things, he made his own small cut and pressed his palm to hers, blood and bark and bright autumn light all mingling together in a moment that felt, to both of them, far larger than the small orchard that held it. "I chose you when you gave me no reason to be afraid," Sharamph said, the old vow words of her clan translated loosely into the common tongue so the humans present could understand them too. "I choose you now, knowing every reason there is." "I stood still because I had already decided there was nothing about you worth running from," Nathan answered, his own voice rough with feeling. "I stand here now because there is nothing in this world I would rather do than keep standing beside you." Vashka bound their joined hands with a length of woven cord, murmured old words in the Grimtusk tongue that spoke of roots growing together beneath separate trunks, and pronounced them bound before ancestors and witnesses both, and the orchard erupted into the mingled cheers of two peoples who, 3 years before, would have met each other across that same ground with drawn blades instead of open hands. The road through the mountain passes took the full 3 seasons Nathan had promised, and he was true to his word in every particular. He and Grimtusk craftsmen worked side by side through that autumn and the following spring, arguing amiably over axle widths and wheel spokes, learning each other's languages of wood and iron, until the carts that finally rolled out along the new-cut switchback road belonged fully to neither people and completely to both. Tomas Farrow forged axles strong enough to survive the mountain grades, and by the 2nd season, merchant caravans were making the crossing regularly, trading iron and cloth from the town for furs and mountain herbs from the clan, and the wary distance that had defined the border for a generation began, slowly and stubbornly, to close. Sharamph rode beside every one of those early caravans herself, her presence enough to calm any clan warrior's suspicion of the human traders and any merchant's fear of the mountain passes, and Nathan came to understand, watching her guide wagon trains through switchback roads she had once patrolled as a warrior rather than a guide, that the woman who had towered over every suitor and sent them fleeing had simply been waiting all along for someone to see the whole of her rather than the use she could be put to. They built their true home in the space between the orchard and the war camp that first winter, a wider homestead than Nathan had ever needed alone, with a proper hearth large enough for Sharamph to stand comfortably before it, and a workshop expanded to hold both his Cartwright's tools and the growing collection of Grimtusk carving knives she had taken up learning to use, badly at first, and then with the same fierce dedication she brought to everything worth doing. The old lightning-struck apple tree, which Vashka had declared sacred to their union, bore its sweetest crop in memory that autumn, and Nathan pressed the first cider from it himself, sharing the first cup with Sharamph on the porch steps where they had once sat together in secret, no longer needing to hide the lantern light or listen for footsteps in the dark. On a clear evening near the end of that first year, with the mountain road finished and busy with honest trade, with Captain Ashby long since transferred to a distant garrison and largely forgotten, with Chief Korgeth visiting often enough that he had, true to his word, begun calling Nathan by his given name. The two of them walked the orchard rows together in the fading light, her hand engulfing his shoulder brushing against her arm with the easy, unthinking closeness of two people who no longer needed excuses to stand near each other. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked, only half serious, watching the last color drain from the sky above the mountains their road now crossed. "Choosing the small Cartwright over every warrior and lord who might have had you." Sheriff stopped walking, turned to face him fully, and cupped his jaw in one broad, gentle hand the way she had that very first night beneath this same tree. "I did not choose you for your size, Nathan Winslow," she said. "I chose you because you were the only man in that whole square, in that whole town, in perhaps this whole wide and frightened world, who looked at me and was not afraid of what I was. Everything else, the road, the treaty, my father's blessing, that was only the world finally catching up to what I already knew the moment you would not look away." He pulled her down into a kiss that tasted of the cider they had shared and the whole long, hard-won road that had brought them here. And around them the orchard rustled in the evening wind, green and growing and entirely, finally, theirs.